A neighbor obsessed with protecting her precious view thought she outsmarted everyone, until the homeowner she bullied sold her a fake lot that wasn't what it seemed, triggering suburban chaos. Let me start from beginning. Maple Crest Ridge was a neighborhood where appearances weren't just valued, they were weaponized. Every cul-de-sac shimmered with freshly washed SUVs, glossy siding, and lawns combed to the grain. Residents flaunted their curated perfection by policing one another's imperfections. It was the sort of community where a mailbox being 2 inches too tall could inspire whispered discussions at book club, and where the HOA bulletin board read more like a list of commandments than guidelines. Into this delicate ecosystem lived Andrew Collins, a quiet homeowner who had bought his property specifically for the panoramic view behind it. Rolling hills, a tree line that blazed orange every autumn, and a stretch of protected land that offered a sense of openness rare in suburban developments. His backyard was his retreat, the one place in his predictable routine that felt untouched by the neighborhood's trademark pettiness. Unfortunately, that peace was shattered the moment a new neighbor moved into the house directly beside his. Her name was Karen Davenport, and she entered Maple Crest like a general marching onto a battlefield she fully expected to dominate. She was notorious before she even finished unpacking, parading through the neighborhood as if she owned the entire street, pointing out flaws, lecturing delivery drivers, and introducing herself as someone with high standards Maple Crest desperately needed. From the beginning, Karen made her priorities clear. She adored her home's top-floor windows, which offered an angled view of the valley beyond Andrew's yard. She referred to this view as her private sunset portal, even though it existed entirely because Andrew's property sloped lower than her own. It wasn't her view, it was borrowed scenery, but Karen treated it as her birthright. Trouble began when Andrew decided to plant a line of ornamental trees along the back of his property, something he had planned since the day he moved in. He wanted shade, a bit of privacy, and a natural frame for his yard. The trees were not tall, barely taller than he was, but their potential bothered Karen. She made her disapproval known through pointed stares over the fence, followed by dramatic sighs, and eventually persistent complaints to the HOA. To her, the trees represented a personal attack. She marched from board member to board member, insisting that the trees would block her view, depress her home's value, and ruin the character of the neighborhood. The HOA, irritated but pressured, cited vague line items about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics and sent Andrew notices implying he should reconsider the trees. Andrew was polite but firm. His property, his rights, his landscaping plan. Karen escalated. She began watching Andrew whenever he stepped outside, acting as though his yard was a stage built for her scrutiny. Whenever a landscaper arrived, she approached them with authoritative demands, insisting they follow her instructions instead of Andrew's. She even tossed a stack of unsolicited, approved landscaping suggestions over his fence, as though he were a rebellious student in need of correction. Then came the moment that pushed everything from nuisance to war. Karen declared to the HOA that she intended to build a privacy wall along the back edge of her property. At first, it seemed unrelated, until the HOA meeting revealed her true motives. She wasn't trying to keep anyone out. She wanted to block Andrew's view so that her view would remain superior. She claimed Andrew's yard created visual clutter, and that his landscaping choices were distracting. She insisted that if she couldn't stop him from adding trees, she would simply force him to look at her wall instead of her looking at his property. The HOA did not approve the wall, but Karen was not deterred. She hired a private contractor, ready to exploit any loophole that would allow her to build something massive and obstructive. Then she discovered what she believed was her golden ticket. A narrow, oddly shaped strip of land behind Andrew's property line that once belonged to the developer and had never been incorporated into the HOA's regulated lots. On paper, it was a tiny remnant parcel, essentially useless. But to Karen, it was salvation. If she owned that land, she argued, she could build whatever wall she wanted. Technically behind Andrew's property, technically outside the HOA's jurisdiction. She began bragging around the neighborhood that she had found a way to teach him a lesson, and that soon he would regret ever trying to ruin her view. She didn't know that Andrew, quiet and observant, had already anticipated her move weeks earlier. He had seen her prowling near the parcel marker, pacing with paperwork in hand, assessing boundaries with predatory interest. And he had done what Karen never imagined anyone would do. He bought the parcel first. He bought it for a symbolic price, obtained the deed, and documented everything legally. But he knew Karen wasn't the type who accepted obstacles. She was the type who pretended not to see them. So, when she approached him, trying to negotiate, or rather intimidate, he remained calm, polite, unreadable. And when she left, assuming she had coerced victory, he quietly prepared the sweetest revenge Maple Crest Ridge had ever seen. The fake lot she thought she bought wasn't fake at all. It simply wasn't what she thought it was. And Andrew was about to let her discover that in the most spectacular way possible. Karen operated like a woman convinced the universe existed to entertain her whims. Once she believed she had secured control of the strip of land behind Andrew's home, she strutted through Maple Crest with the swagger of a queen reclaiming her throne. She hinted to neighbors that she had made a strategic purchase. She whispered that she finally had the leverage needed to put Andrew in his place. To the HOA board, she insinuated that she was simply correcting a developer oversight. In reality, she had entered into what she proudly called an informal property agreement with Andrew. An agreement he had meticulously recorded but deliberately crafted to avoid fulfilling the fantasy she constructed in her head. She paid him for usage rights, not ownership. She couldn't legally build anything permanent on the land. She had no authority to modify it, fence it, or claim it. On paper, Andrew still owned every inch. Karen had purchased nothing more than the illusion of a lot, a hollow victory created by her refusal to read the documents she signed. Andrew didn't deceive her. He simply let her deceive herself. Soon after writing the check, Karen launched into construction plans as if she were developing an empire. She brought in contractors, architects, and even a personal design consultant who specialized in statement landscaping. She envisioned a towering stone wall rising behind Andrew's yard, a grand structure that would transform her home from an ordinary suburban house into something resembling a fortified villa. The wall, she declared, would elevate property values for the entire street, while conveniently removing Andrew's cherished view. But before any construction could proceed, Karen wanted the land cleared. She hired a landscaping crew and instructed them to remove brush, level soil, and mark future footing locations for her wall. Workers arrived with machinery, tearing through the soft earth, leaving behind mounds of dirt and deep tire ruts. Andrew simply watched. He observed as Karen hovered over the workers, barking orders with exaggerated authority. She waved her contract in the air, reminding everyone that she, in her mind, owned the land. She strutted along the boundary, eyes bright with anticipation, exhilarated by the idea that she had finally outplayed her neighbor. What Karen didn't realize was that her renovations were destroying a protected drainage buffer, a zone marked in county registries and environmental planning maps. The strip of land existed specifically because it was undevelopable, an essential flow channel designed to prevent neighborhood flooding. Any disturbance to it triggered mandatory environmental inspections. But Karen had never bothered to investigate why the parcel had been left empty all these years. She assumed the developer had simply forgotten to assign it to someone. She assumed she was smarter than everyone else. She assumed Andrew had reluctantly given in because she had pressured him into submission. She assumed incorrectly. One afternoon, as contractors prepared to begin excavating deeper into the soil, county inspectors arrived, summoned not by Andrew, but by residents who had watched the machines tear into the land and panicked about potential flooding risks. The inspectors surveyed the area, examined the disturbed soil, and followed the property lines with measured frowns. They determined quickly that unauthorized modifications were being made. They traced the disturbances back to Karen, who instantly tried to blame Andrew. She thrust her paperwork at the inspectors, insisting she had purchased the lot and had every right to build. But the inspectors weren't interested in her confidence. They wanted legal proof. Karen's color drained as they analyzed the documents she had signed. It took them less than 5 minutes to recognize the truth. She had no ownership rights, no construction permissions, and no authority. All she had was limited, revocable usage rights that explicitly prohibited structural changes. And even if she had owned it, the land still could not legally be altered. The county issued an immediate stop work order. They fined Karen for environmental disruption and required restoration of the damaged buffer zone. The costs of returning the land to its original condition exceeded the amount she had paid Andrew, and her wallet screamed under the weight of it. But humiliation was the true price she paid. The story spread through Maple Crest faster than a neighborhood rumor about mismatched shingles. Residents chuckled behind closed doors, pretending sympathy while secretly relishing the downfall of someone who had bulldozed her way through every interaction. Karen became the punchline to jokes murmured at backyard barbecues and whispered at HOA meetings. Even those who had once tolerated her grew tired of her theatrics. Through it all, Andrew remained quiet. He maintained his property, tended his newly planted trees, and stayed politely uninvolved. But everyone understood what he had done. He hadn't tricked her. He had simply allowed her to reveal her own arrogance. She had bought a fantasy, and he had sold it to her legally, transparently, without ever hiding the truth. The collapse of her grand plan would have ended the conflict, if Karen had been capable of accepting defeat. Instead, she prepared for retaliation, and Maple Crest Ridge braced itself for the inevitable escalation. Karen's downfall did not inspire humility. Instead, it fueled a frantic, desperate determination to reclaim a sense of control. In her mind, she had not been caught breaking rules. She had been sabotaged by Andrew. She talked loudly and often about how she had been tricked, reciting a dramatic version of events that positioned her as a tragic heroine victimized by a conniving neighbor. Behind the scenes, however, the HOA had lost patience. The environmental fines triggered mandatory review of Karen's property, and complaints from neighbors piled up. Loud construction noise, trespassing workers straying onto private lawns, and her aggressive confrontations with anyone she believed had betrayed her. The HOA president, an elderly man who despised conflict nearly as much as he despised rule breakers, called an emergency meeting to address the ongoing disruption. The gathering took place in the community center, where folding chairs were arranged in a circle of forced civility. Residents attended in unusually high numbers, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. Drama seldom escalated this far in Maple Crest without reaching explosive levels. Andrew arrived quietly and took a seat at the back. Karen arrived in a whirlwind of paperwork and indignation, her energy radiating through the room like static electricity. The meeting opened with a review of the fines, the damaged drainage buffer, and the county-issued restoration orders. Karen attempted to argue, but the HOA cut her off repeatedly, insisting she wait her turn. When she finally spoke, she launched into a long, winding monologue accusing Andrew of manipulation, fraud, and targeted harassment. She alleged he had intentionally sold her the wrong kind of lot and tricked her into believing she had full ownership. But the board had already reviewed the documents, every signature, every clause, every line that had clearly stated her rights and limitations. They had also reviewed video footage from security cameras across Maple Crest. The cameras showed her instructing workers to dig, gesturing arrogantly at the land, and dismissing anyone who questioned her authority. Her argument dissolved in minutes. Still, she pressed on, insisting that the HOA punish Andrew. It was a last-ditch tactic, wild and misguided, but she clung to it like a lifeline. The board then turned to Andrew. For the first time in weeks, he addressed the situation publicly. His explanation was simple and calm. He had sold her usage rights at her request. He had made the terms clear. He had not encouraged construction. He had not involved himself in her decisions. He had done nothing wrong. What followed was the HOA's unanimous conclusion. Karen alone was responsible for the entire disaster. The board issued additional community fines for disruption, violations of common area protections, and unauthorized contractor activity. She was given a strict deadline to restore the land and ordered to cease all further construction projects until she submitted formal plans. Plans the HOA made clear they had no intention of approving. Karen's face crumpled with rage, disbelief, and a dawning realization that she had no allies left. Still, the final twist had yet to unfold. As part of the restoration process, the county required a permanent easement marker to be installed on the strip of land, one that clearly designated it as an environmentally protected buffer under Andrew's ownership. This marker needed to be visible from both properties and impossible to remove legally. And so, one crisp morning, workers arrived to install a sturdy official metal post at the edge of Andrew's backyard. Karen watched from her upper window as the sign was anchored deep into the soil, a sign reading, "Protected Drainage Buffer, Private Property, Owned by A. Collins. No alterations permitted. County Code 1492. In one smooth motion, the universe had gifted Andrew a permanent, legally documented reminder that Karen could never touch his land again. The wall she dreamed of building would never rise. The view she worshipped would remain shared. And the strip of land she believed she controlled now bore a sign declaring, in bold letters, that she held no power at all. The neighborhood treated the sign like a historical monument. It became a symbol of Karen's downfall, a cautionary tale whispered during evening walks and HOA gatherings. Andrew, however, treated it like any other boundary marker. Useful, unobtrusive, simply part of the landscape. Karen, stripped of leverage and humiliated beyond recovery, retreated from neighborhood life. She closed her blinds, avoided eye contact, and withdrew into the shadows of her over-decorated home. Her reign ended not with triumph, but with silence. Andrew's trees eventually grew taller, casting gentle shade across his yard. Birds nested in their branches. The hills rolled behind them exactly as they always had, their view unchanged, untouched by Karen's ambitions. And so Maple Crest Ridge returned to its polished calm, carrying with it the memory of the time a neighbor tried to steal a view, only to buy a fake lot, destroy her own reputation, and accidentally secure her rival's victory in writing forever. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more.